Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. The Chamber of Mines of South Africa Vice President Neal Froneman recently highlighted the African mining vision as an important guide for the industry. Martin Creamer tells us more. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Sashnee.
Can you tell us why Froneman is so keen on the African mining vision?
Well, the African mining vision is so important for this continent because, we've had in the past adversarial relationships and legacy issues developing because of the way we went about mining in South Africa on the continent. And you can see that the vision now is collective and Africa is working together. They need to benefit the billion plus people on this continent. It's not a question of the elite always benefiting disproportionately. There needs to be a better spread of how that benefit passes through the community, passes through the employees, the suppliers, and the shareholders. So, it needs to float all boats. And it's good that Africa is beginning to sing from the same hymn sheet, so that although there are 54 countries, there are certain basics that are needed if you're going to exploit those metals and minerals. And it's so important to actually do that in Africa. It's so important that we also take the risk involved in finding out where these metals and minerals are and then getting the private sector. So the state is the first mover to try and tell you where everything is. And then the private sector comes in to try and work out the commercial realization of that. So it's almost like a public-private partnership. They need to work together, and the two words win-win are starting to come in, and not just win-lose, because, I think we're the only continent, developing continent, where they refer to a minerals curse. It should be a blessing. I mean, did they ever refer, as Bobby Godsall said at the African Mining Networking, did they ever refer to the discovery of oil in America as a curse? Or did they ever refer to the industrial revolution in Britain, which was underpinned by resources, as a curse? No, it's only here in these developing countries. Suddenly mining is a curse. African mining vision is trying to make sure it doesn't have negative impact. Obviously you can do things badly. That's why they need a vision like this, so that they do things the correct way from the start, and that you look at adding value inside the continent to try and maximize those jobs. The billion plus people on the continent now, they can't just have a situation where you extract and go. You've got to extract, you've got to use from that extraction a supply chain. The people have got to be involved. And then as you bring in services, you need to include, must be inclusive. It must be inclusive, and that's a word we're hearing not only from the African Mining Vision, but we're hearing it from the World Bank, we're hearing it from the IMF, and even, the Germans who've done so well. Their finance minister said the other day, you can't just have a situation where systems just benefit the elite in such a disproportionate way. And you can't just have this trickle down anymore. That, people used to say, well, if you've got something big happening at the top, there will be this trickle down to the other communities. It's not really working. So you need something like an African vision to make sure that the supply chains are put in place early, so that when you exploit those metals and minerals, and of course there's also the agricultural potential which is not involved here, you also have infrastructure build up, because you need those roads, you need the electricity, you need rail, you need things to build those economies and cities. And Africa's billion plus people are now crying out for that. So it's quite timely that this is starting to move, and it's good because you need the basic to be done well so that this continent moves forward.
Froneman also highlighted the Zambezi Protocol, which is a blueprint for solving the current crisis in the mining industry.
That's right. The Brenthurst Foundation, which is funded by the Oppenheimer family, has a huge history of mining in South Africa. Diamond mining, gold mining, actually building the economy of Joburg really was built on this gold mining, and then it also went to the Free State, and it's still active 120 years later. They had a think tank and worked out the Zambezi Protocol, which is again saying, be real about things. This industry is probably going to not be as big as it used to be, particularly in South Africa. But the potential is huge in Africa. again, similar to the African vision, start working out strategies now. Get governments to work with the mining industry so that they know when you're sowing, you're risking. You might not get anything out of that, particularly on the exploration front. And having a sort of a public-private partnership that ensures that you can explore in a way that we see the Canadians did it with their flow-through scheme. There is a way of giving an incentive to get you to take those huge risks to explore. And then, only reaping when the rewards are there. There needs to be certain tax systems that when you're not reaping at all, you haven't really got any tax to pay. So there mustn't be this expectation. You must start from the risk and reward must be shared, and you must know what do you regard as a very high profit. When there's a windfall, how much tax should you pay? Should be paying more. When there's a nice windfall, you pay more tax. When there's nothing, sometimes you haven't got anything to pay. And that was realized by the Germans ages ago, with their mining. The tax would be high when the profits were high and there was a windfall. But the tax would be very low and sometimes nil if nothing was happening, which makes a lot of sense. It's not the normal industry where you've got a factory and you churn things out at a certain rate, at a certain price. These people are also price takers. They're not price makers, so the risk is huge. And that is the realization of the Zambezi Protocol. You've got to work so that you sow and you share the risks of sowing, but then you also reward. And same as employees. When there's outperformance, when you're outperforming, then you get the reward. But if there's absolutely no sales, you don't. And unions must also come in, and that's what the Zambezi Protocol is all about.
Now, the Zambezi Protocol also says that mining needs to understand the problems that government has to address, and Froneman has also urged that the realization of mineral riches not be hampered by a lack of trust between government and business.
This is mistrust. There's such a lot of mistrust that we've set up, as Bobby Gottsel was saying at the African Mining Network, phony companies, phony businesses. It's all done in secrecy. You're not having an open tender system. You're not having an open application system. So you need an internet where people, if they want mineral rights or they want mining rights, they should be applying on the internet for everybody to see, saying, I want platinum in that area, I want these rights, can you give them to me? And then the government must be replying in public on there, yes, these are available at such and such. He is also drawing attention to his work in the last 5 years in the Russian Federation. Now he's saying, during the Soviet Union period, the exploration was incredible. So there is, in that Russian Federation, there's so much data on mineralization. He said, but in the absence of a market economy, they haven't been able to turn it to account. It's worth nothing when it's in the ground. But the information is there. Now they're beginning to realize, well, how can we commercialize this? So they go into, openly contested auctions where people bid for it. Now that is one way of doing it. And we need transparency, we need openness, we need accountability, and this secrecy and doing things in darkness is destroying this industry. A lot of the exploration rights are somewhere, people don't know where they are, who's got them, because they actually wanted to use these for racial transformation. But it's a very risky starting point. And I think that whoever decided on that didn't realize how risky it is. So it's just going to not benefit the country if you go that route. So that mistrust has to end. And even Bobby Gottsel was saying at the African Mining Network, there was a time of huge mistrust between English and Afrikaans in South Africa. They didn't trust each other, they didn't like each other, and they accused each other of all sorts of things. But they didn't allow it to get in the way of infrastructural development. Now he was saying, even though there was that huge adversarial relationship between the English and Afrikaans in the old South Africa, they still got the Richards Bay coal line built, which turned South Africa from a zero exporter of coal into one of the biggest in the world and still the third biggest on a very efficient system, probably the most efficient system. So they were fighting with each other, but they knew when to work together. And he even recalled that when Ergo, the gold from dumps project was opened, they wanted the then Prime Minister, John Vorster, to open it. So they phoned him and said, will you open this? And he said, well, Harry Oppenheimer be there, because of course they were political adversaries. They said, we'll let you know. When they let him know that Harry was going to open it, he said, no, I'm not going to be there. So, this was the sort of fight going on all the time. Yet, when it came to doing things for the benefit of South Africa Incorporated, they then put their heads together and got things done. And so he's saying, even if there is mistrust, you must still put your country first. And that's the message that needs to go out. And, Froneman is saying, get rid of that mistrust. Even if you have to have a mining truth commission, but people must start working together.
Froneman also recently urged South Africa to put an end to adversarial mining relationships. What was he calling for?
I think that the adversarial relationship between government and the industry has actually been worse than between Labour and the industry. I think it's reaching a point now where it's never been more possible for Labour and business to really come together and say, look, this is what we need here, and then shame the government into doing it. But the government at the moment is split. It's fighting. It's adversarial within itself. It's warring within itself. And, if you can get an end to those adversarial relationships between business and Labour, and I think there's a better chance than ever, and also the ANC involvement, you need to agree on a long-term strategy. At the Joburg and Durban, the ANC spokesperson on economics, he called for a long-term strategy, because that's what mining needs. And it's in that strategy where you can come to those agreements where you do things when there are ups, and you behave in a different way when things are down. And so there is that understanding ahead of time of the way things work in a cyclical industry. And we know that the German unions are good at that. When things are down, they don't make huge demands. When things are up, and there's outperformance, they get their reward at that point. And this is the sort of thing that needs to happen now, and people see it as opportune. They're thinking that it's never been more possible for the industry and unions to come to an agreement and then force it on the government. Because what can the government say after that, if you're both coming in there together? So that's the sort of possibilities that are starting to pop up at the moment.
Thanks for speaking with us, Martin.
It's a great pleasure, Sashnee.
That's it for today. Join us again next week for more news analysis on South Africa's mining industry.